RFK Jr. has announced that he's launching a new study into the causes of autism, and everybody in the scientific community is throwing all the shade at him they can. Watch this introduction from the Hill.
We are going to know by September. We've launched a massive testing and research effort that's going to involve hundreds of scientists from around the world. By September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic, and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures.
My name is Casey. I'm the Rumble Right Dad. I've been a therapist for 12 years, a dad for nearly 9, a husband for 10, a believer for 18, and sober for 19. And I am working to bring back common sense into my industry of the therapeutic community and trying to use this institution for what it might be good for, which is providing real solutions for people. If I can be of any value to you, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
We will know by September.
There will be no bigger news conference than that. So that's it. If you can come up with that answer where you stop taking something, you stop eating something, or maybe it's a shot, but something's causing it.
It is important to note that decades of research has concluded there is no link between vaccines and autism. But nevertheless, we will be waiting for our RFK Jr.'s report in September and his findings.
RFK says that he can collect the data or do a meta-analysis by September, and everybody's saying that 5 months would be way too fast to come up with any conclusions. But the fact is that by doing a meta-analysis, you're really just collecting all the information from a variety of studies that have already been conducted, which is part of what I've been doing as part of my master's degree at Liberty University for psychology. Is you simply collect the data, and certainly there has been the experimental research, the tit for tat little measurements that are being done that can simply be collected. So it's possible that he's already begun this and that he believes they're moving towards a conclusion. So it's not impossible that could happen by September.
This study is a man by the name of David, I believe it's pronounced Geyer or Geer. He was disciplined more than a decade ago, according to the Washington Post, for practicing medicine without a license. I think that RFK Jr.'s beliefs about vaccines and autism are, at least in broad terms, pretty clear. There was the famous 1998 study that proposed such a link and was later retracted, and the British person actually, Andrew Wakefield, who was behind that, was struck off the medical register. As we noted in the introduction, there have been numerous studies that have found no link.
When this appeal to authority comes up every time where they say, well, there's been all these studies and there's been no link and nobody can prove anything, the fact is that the majority of common sense people within this country or throughout the West, we don't want to take the typical scientific view because the science has told us a whole lot of things that we can recognize are falsehoods in the last 5 years. And especially since COVID, everybody should have a healthy amount of skepticism for whether science has the answers for these types of questions. So that appeal to authority, I'm sorry, you get the stiff arm at this point.
There's a Danish study, and it studied in thousands and thousands of children over 7 years, and for almost half a million children, and found no connection, no difference between the risk of autism between those who had been vaccinated and those who had
Just
not.
as a common sense person, looking at a study that was retracted and using that as the evidence as to why there might not be a link, it speaks a little bit to the fact that these incentive structures are set up against anything that would countervene or have a counter narrative to vaccines, pharmaceuticals, and pushing forward all of this medical science that has been all set up to benefit the parties with the most money. So a healthy amount of skepticism, again, comes into this, where we desire to see those systems, the big pharma systems, circumvented at every turn if we can, because we believe that natural pathways to treating these conditions could be superior. And looking into what is it that we've given into our system, our structures, whether it's the food or medicine, what is it that's been fed into there that has actually begun to spike some of these conditions like autism. It's very possible that we're looking at an incentive structure that's set up to where big pharma can manipulate the science, because they fund most of these research studies flat out in order to be able to get a grant to do research. There's a lot of big pharma money behind there, so the incentive structures might be set up to have a little bit of a conspiracy theory here. Can you see where RFK is coming
Have
from?
not yet seen autism diagnosis rates level out as we would typically see with an increase in diagnoses. For example, with left-handedness, around 1960, you started to see actually the level of people who were left-handed start to level out because they got over the sort of fear about a child being left-handed.
Yep.
I mean, we actually
What this gentleman's referring to is that supposedly the diagnosticians have a better understanding of what symptoms they're looking for in order to identify these disorders. And while that might be true, it also cannot account for the amount of drastic cases that are on the increase and the amount of symptom picture that it seems to be increasing as well. And it's gone from like a 1 in multiple thousands of children who had this to a 1 in 31. And there is no chance, there's absolutely no chance that these savant type behaviors were at a 1 in 31 clip even 2 decades ago. So there might be something, just look into it. There might be something that might be at root of this that speaks a little bit to what we're putting into our bodies or environmental factors that are in the air or one of those things. So I don't believe that the drastic amount of increase of autism cases has anything to do with just a further recognition of diagnosticians. And part of that is because there isn't really as much incentive for someone to diagnose autism as there would be for something like ADHD, because to my knowledge, there's really not a ton of medications that can just be doled out. So there's less incentive for the doctors to just say, oh yes, this kid has autism at every turn or he's on the spectrum, because the treatments are not really as fiscally advantageous as it might be with something like ADHD, where they simply see the child, they need a one every month appointment in order to receive medication because it's a narcotic. That, to my knowledge, is not happening with autism. So the rate of increase wouldn't be to the advantage of the diagnostician as much as it would with other disorders.
what causes autism is a really worthy underlying goal.
I agree with that.
But I do agree that the timeline is absurd. To go back 5 months and challenge our assumptions. Marty McCary, who is a new member of the Trump administration, had a really fascinating book, Blind Spots, which was one of my beach reads this past summer. And he talked about how so many base assumptions made by medical doctors have found out to be based on junk science. For example, the idea that peanut butter allergies can be avoided by not doing early exposure to things like.
What this young lady's saying is simply the scientific method. Yes, it is good to go back and rewrite some of our prior assumptions, because I need not remind us that we used to trust frontal lobotomies as a reasonable treatment for people that had severe and persistent mental illness. That is going up through your nose and taking out part of your brain so that you walk around as a zombie. Now, that is trusted science from 100 years ago, so maybe taking another look at the science would be a really wise move.
Come up with a thesis, you test it, it seems to be right, you think that looks right, and then someone comes up with further studies or further experiments that call that into question, and the scientific consensus shifts in some way. And obviously that is literally how we acquire knowledge, is that it accrues over time. That seems to me different from the Kennedy perspective, where I do think that he's starting off with a conclusion, and that's not where you should be.
What this gentleman's saying is that RFK Jr. would be starting with the end in mind. And I have a little bit of news for this gentleman. That is what a hypothesis is. There is not a person who starts a research study without a theory, which feeds into a hypothesis. This is what the numbers that we're evolving, that we're collecting, are working to prove. So that is basically starting with the end in mind. And a great many of these research studies, maybe based on some prior analyses, are able to come up with a goal. As Trump said, if this comes through with any reasonable conclusions that are scientifically rigorous, it will be the biggest news, because this is one of the biggest questions of our era. What is causing the increase in this spike in autism cases? And I, as a therapist, am severely invested in finding these types of solutions, because it is a nearly impossible disorder to work in and to treat rigorously in ways that would provide relief and value to the patient, to the family, to the client themselves. This is the question of our time. And when young children begin to show these symptoms, are there interventions that we can use at the onset that would be able to provide real medical, real therapeutic relief? If taking a second look at whether therapy is valuable is something that you would support, please like, share, and subscribe. I've gotten over 1,300 followers, 1,380 followers. I've been so blessed by all the support because I feel like I'm not alone. I'm not the only person who thinks that common sense should come back into this industry and that protecting children is of the utmost importance in our modern era. Thank you so much. I'm the Rumble Right Dad. Have a great day.